Hollywood lied to you. Every cowboy movie, every Western hero, every frontier legend you grew up watching was whitewashed. The truth: the real Lone Ranger was black. So were some of the toughest lawmen, the best cowboys, and the most feared gunfighters in the West. Today, you're meeting 19 black heroes who built the frontier, fought for justice, and changed history while Hollywood erased them from every story. Their names were deliberately buried, their achievements stolen, their legacies hidden for over a century. But not anymore. Buckle up, because after this video, you'll never watch a Western the same way again. Number 1. Bass Reeves, the real Lone Ranger who arrested 3,000 outlaws. Bass Reeves was born into slavery in Arkansas in 1838. His childhood was spent in bondage, serving the family of Arkansas State Legislator William Steele Reeves. During the Civil War, when his enslaver joined the Confederate Army and took Bass with him as a body servant, Bass saw an opportunity. After a dispute, possibly involving a card game where Bass refused to let his enslaver cheat or beat him, Bass fought back and escaped. He fled west into Indian Territory, modern-day Oklahoma, and disappeared into land controlled by Creek and Seminole nations, who had also been forcibly relocated there. For years, Reeves lived among the Creek and Seminole people. He learned their languages, customs, survival techniques, and tracking methods that would later make him the most effective lawman in the West. He hunted, trapped, and learned to read the land in ways few white men ever could. When the Civil War ended and the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, Bass was finally free. He married Nellie Jenny from Texas, started a family, and began working as a farmer and ranch hand. In 1875, Judge Isaac Parker, known as the Hanging Judge, was appointed to the federal court in Fort Smith, Arkansas, with jurisdiction over Indian Territory. Parker needed deputy marshals tough enough to bring law to a region overrun with outlaws, and he didn't care about skin color, only competence. Bass Reeves was recruited and became one of the first black deputy U.S. Marshals west of the Mississippi River. For over 30 years, Reeves patrolled more than 75,000 square miles of the most dangerous territory in America. This wasn't civilized country. It was a lawless refuge for killers, thieves, rapists, and fugitives from every state. Reeves worked alone or with a single Native American posseman, riding into towns and camps where most lawmen wouldn't dare go. He arrested more than 3,000 felons during his career, a record that has never been broken by any lawman in American history. Reeves was known for his fairness. He treated everyone equally, white, black, Native, it didn't matter. When his own son was accused of murder, Reeves tracked him down and arrested him personally, tears streaming down his face. That's how seriously he took justice. He carried his warrant book in one pocket and a Bible in the other. Outlaws feared him not just because he was skilled, but because he was relentless and incorruptible. He retired in 1907 and died in 1910 at the age of 72. Decades later, when writers created the Lone Ranger character for radio in 1933, they borrowed everything about Bass Reeves. The masked hero working in Indian Territory, the silver bullets, the white horse, the native companion, the strict moral code, all of it was Bass Reeves. They just made him white and never credited the real man. Number 2. Stagecoach Mary Fields, the toughest mail carrier in Montana. Mary Fields was born into slavery in Tennessee around 1832. She spent the first 3 decades of her life in bondage, forced to work without compensation, watching family members sold away, living under constant threat of violence. When the Civil War ended and emancipation finally came, Mary was already in her 30s, an age when most people's lives were already half over. But Mary wasn't done. She was just getting started. After emancipation, she worked her way west and eventually ended up at St. Peter's Mission, a convent and school for Native American children in Cascade, Montana, in the 1880s. She was hired to do laundry and hauling, but she became essential to the mission's survival. She freighted supplies across dangerous terrain, protected the nuns from wild animals and hostile encounters, and kept the mission functioning through brutal Montana winters. Mary was over 6 feet tall and weighed about 200 pounds, built like an NFL linebacker before the NFL existed. She smoked cigars that would choke most men, drank whiskey straight in saloons where women weren't supposed to go, and carried a Smith & Wesson .38 revolver on her hip and a Winchester rifle across her back. She wore men's clothes because they were practical, and she didn't care what anyone thought about it. She won fistfights against men half her age who made the mistake of underestimating her. In 1895, at over 60 years old, Mary became the second woman and the first black woman to carry mail for the U.S. Postal Service. She got a contract to deliver mail on a dangerous 17-mile route through Montana wilderness, facing blizzards, wolves, bandits, and extreme cold. She drove a stagecoach pulled by horses and never missed a single delivery in over 8 years. One winter night, her stagecoach broke an axle in a blizzard and her horses froze to death. Mary didn't panic. She wrapped the mailbag over her shoulder, grabbed her rifle, and walked miles through waist-deep snow in sub-zero temperatures to the next town. She delivered every letter. The Postal Service motto about neither snow nor rain nor heat was tested by Mary Fields, and she passed every time. Local tough guys tried to intimidate her. It never worked. One man insulted her in a saloon. She knocked him out cold with one punch. Another time, a man drew a gun on her. She outdrew him, shot the gun out of his hand, and told him to get out of town. Even the sheriff was scared of her. People in Cascade said she was tougher than any man in Montana, and they meant it as a compliment. She died in 1914 at around 82 years old. Schools in Cascade closed for her funeral because she was so beloved. But outside Montana, her story was buried for decades. Number 3, Nat Love, also known as Deadwood Dick, the greatest cowboy in the West. Nat Love was born enslaved in Tennessee in 1854. After emancipation, he headed west at 15 years old with nothing but determination. He got a job as a cowboy in Texas and spent the next 20 years working cattle drives across the frontier. He became a legend known as Deadwood Dick after winning a rodeo competition in Deadwood, South Dakota, in 1876. Love could rope, ride, and shoot better than almost anyone. In roping contests, he'd win against dozens of competitors. In shooting contests, he'd hit targets other men couldn't even see. He rode thousands of miles on cattle drives from Texas to Kansas to Montana, facing stampedes, outlaws, harsh weather, and every danger the frontier offered. He survived gunfights, fought off rustlers, and once rode 100 miles in under 12 hours to deliver an urgent message. He wrote an autobiography in 1907 called The Life and Adventures of Nat Love, better known in the cattle country as Deadwood Dick. In it, he described wrestling steers, surviving shootouts, and living through adventures that sound impossible but were verified by other cowboys who knew him. He didn't exaggerate his skills. If anything, he undersold them because his reputation spoke for itself. What makes Nat Love's story important is that he represented thousands of black cowboys who are completely erased from Western mythology. After the Civil War, about 25% of all cowboys were black. They did the same dangerous work, rode the same trails, and faced the same risks as white cowboys, but history forgot them. Nat Love made sure his story survived. Number 4, Cathay Williams, the only woman to serve in the Buffalo Soldiers disguised as a man. Cathay Williams was born enslaved in Missouri around 1844. During the Civil War, Union forces freed her, and she worked as a cook and washerwoman for the Army. After the war ended, jobs were scarce for black women. So in 1866, Cathay did something unthinkable. She disguised herself as a man, took the name William Cathay, and enlisted in the U.S. Army as a Buffalo Soldier in the 38th Infantry Regiment. For nearly 2 years, she served on the frontier, marching hundreds of miles, building forts, and facing the brutal conditions of military life in the West. She kept her secret the entire time, bunking with men, following orders, and never revealing her identity. It wasn't until she became seriously ill in 1868 that a doctor discovered the truth during an examination. She was discharged, but by then she'd already proven she could do everything the men could do. After her discharge, Cathay worked as a seamstress and cook in New Mexico and Colorado. She applied for a military pension, but the Army denied it, claiming her enlistment was invalid because she was a woman. She spent her final years in poverty, her service ignored and unrecognized. She died around 1893, and for over a century, almost no one knew her story. Cathay Williams is the only documented woman to serve in the Buffalo Soldiers, but historians believe there may have been others who successfully kept their identities hidden. Her courage and determination were extraordinary, but the system refused to honor her. Number 5. Cherokee Bill. The outlaw so dangerous lawmen were terrified of him. Crawford Goldsby, known as Cherokee Bill, was born in 1876 in Indian Territory. He was of mixed black, Cherokee, and white ancestry, and grew up in a violent, lawless region where survival meant being tougher than everyone else. By age 18, he was one of the most feared outlaws in the West. Cherokee Bill joined the Cook Gang and went on a crime spree across Indian Territory, robbing trains, stores, and banks. He killed at least 7 men, maybe more, and showed no hesitation. Lawmen were terrified to go after him because he was fast, accurate, and willing to shoot first. He ambushed deputy marshals, killed a railroad agent in cold blood, and escaped from custody multiple times. Bass Reeves, the legendary black marshal, was one of the few lawmen brave enough to hunt him. The two never faced each other directly, but the fact that Reeves was assigned to the case shows how dangerous Cherokee Bill was considered. In 1895, Cherokee Bill was finally captured through trickery. A woman he trusted lured him into a trap. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to hang. On March 17, 1896, at just 20 years old, Cherokee Bill was executed in Fort Smith, Arkansas. When asked if he had any last words, he reportedly said, "I came here to die, not to make a speech." He went to the gallows without fear. Cherokee Bill's story is complicated. He was a violent criminal, but he was also a product of a brutal system that offered black and native people in Indian Territory almost no legitimate opportunities. Number 6. Bose Ickard, the cowboy who saved Charles Goodnight's life multiple times. Bose Ickard was born enslaved in Mississippi in 1843. After emancipation, he headed to Texas and became a cowboy, eventually working for legendary cattleman Charles Goodnight. Ickard became Goodnight's most trusted employee and closest friend, riding thousands of miles on cattle drives and saving Goodnight's life on multiple occasions. On one drive, Ickard spotted a group of Comanche warriors preparing to ambush the herd. He warned Goodnight, and together they negotiated with the Comanche and avoided a massacre. On another occasion, when the herd stampeded at night, Ickard rode into the chaos and managed to turn the lead steers, preventing the entire herd from running off a cliff. Goodnight later said Ickard was the most skilled cowboy he ever worked with. When Ickard died in 1929, Charles Goodnight personally paid for his funeral and had a headstone erected with an inscription that read, "Bose Ickard served with me 4 years on the Goodnight-loving trail, never shirked a duty or disobeyed an order, rode with me in many stampedes, participated in 3 engagements with Comanches, and splendid behavior." That tribute is extraordinary because it came from a white Texas cattleman in an era of extreme racism. Goodnight genuinely respected and valued Ickard as a partner and friend. But outside of that tombstone, Bose Ickard's contributions were forgotten. Hollywood never told his story. Number 7. Biddy Mason, the formerly enslaved woman who became a millionaire real estate investor. Biddy Mason was born enslaved in Georgia in 1818. She was forced to walk nearly 2,000 miles from Mississippi to California in 1851, herding livestock on foot while her enslaver moved west. When they arrived in California, a free state, Biddy realized she had a chance at freedom. She sued for her liberty and won in 1856, becoming a free woman at age 38. She worked as a nurse and midwife in Lowe's Angels, saving every penny. She bought her first piece of property in 1866, a small lot downtown for $250. Over the next decades, she bought more land, carefully investing as Lowe's Angels grew. By the 1880s, she was one of the wealthiest black women in California, worth over $300,000, equivalent to millions today. But Biddy didn't hoard her wealth. She used it to help her community. She funded the first black church in Lowe's Angels, paid for food and supplies for flood victims, visited prisoners, and gave money to anyone in need. She opened her home to people who had nowhere else to go. Neighbors said she never turned anyone away. Biddy Mason died in 1891. Her funeral was one of the largest Lowe's Angels had ever seen. Thousands of people, black and white, came to honor her. But within a generation, her story was forgotten. It wasn't until the 1980s that historians rediscovered her contributions and fought to have her recognized as one of California's most important pioneers. Number 8. Bill Pickett, the inventor of bulldogging and the greatest rodeo star. Bill Pickett was born in Texas in 1870 to formerly enslaved parents who were trying to build a life in a state that didn't want them to succeed. He grew up working on ranches, learning to ride, rope, and handle cattle from the age when most kids were still in school. Texas ranching was brutal work, and black cowboys faced additional challenges: lower pay, worse treatment, and constant racism from white coworkers and bosses. But Pickett had a gift. He could do things with animals that no one else could. As a young man, Pickett developed a unique and revolutionary technique for bringing down steers. Traditional methods involved roping the animal and wrestling it to the ground through strength and leverage. But Pickett invented something completely different. He would ride alongside a running steer at full speed, leap from his horse onto the steer's back, grab it by the horns, twist its head, and then, in the most shocking move, bite the steer's sensitive upper lip the way a bulldog would bite prey. The pain and pressure would force the steer to stop fighting, and Pickett would throw it to the ground using the leverage from the bite. It sounds impossible. Witnesses said it looked like magic. Pickett turned this incredible skill into a rodeo act that made him famous across the world. He performed at county fairs, Wild West shows, and massive rodeos across the United States, Canada, Mexico, and South America. Crowds of thousands would pack arenas to watch this black cowboy do something no one had ever seen before. He became so popular that he was invited to perform at Madison Square Garden in New York City, the biggest stage in America. In Mexico City in 1908, Pickett faced a fighting bull in front of 25,000 spectators. He wrestled the bull down using his bulldogging technique, but the crowd turned hostile, throwing bottles and debris into the arena because they were angry that a black cowboy had defeated their prized bull. Pickett walked out of that arena with his head high, having proven his skill to the world. He continued performing into his 60s. In 1932, at age 61, Pickett was kicked in the head by a horse and died from his injuries. He was inducted into the National Rodeo Cowboy Hall of Fame in 1971, the first black cowboy to receive that honor. Bulldogging, now called steer wrestling, is still a major rodeo event today, and it exists because Bill Pickett invented it. Number 9. York, the enslaved explorer who was essential to the Lewis and Clark expedition. York was enslaved by William Clark from childhood. His exact birth year is unknown, probably around 1770 in Virginia, but what is known is that he never had a choice in anything that happened to him. When Meriwether Lewis and William Clark organized their expedition to explore the Louisiana Purchase and find a route to the Pacific Ocean in 1804, Clark decided to bring York along. York wasn't asked. He wasn't given the option to refuse. He was property, forced to join one of the most dangerous expeditions in American history. But despite being enslaved, York's contributions were absolutely critical to the expedition's success, even though history spent 150 years trying to erase him. York was a skilled hunter who provided game to feed the 33-member expedition. He was strong and tireless, helping to pull boats, carry supplies, and build camps. He helped navigate dangerous terrain, from the Missouri River to the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific coast. And most importantly, he served as a diplomat with native nations they encountered along the way. Many tribes, particularly those on the Great Plains and in the Pacific Northwest, had never seen a black person before. York's appearance fascinated them. Some tribes believed he had spiritual power or that his dark skin was paint that could be rubbed off. York used this attention strategically, building trust and facilitating trade and alliances that kept the expedition alive. Without York's diplomatic efforts, the expedition might have been wiped out by hostile encounters. When they reached the Pacific Ocean in 1805, the expedition held a vote on where to build their winter camp. York was allowed to vote, one of the few documented cases of an enslaved person voting in early American history. It was a small moment of recognition in a life defined by bondage. After the expedition returned in 1806, York asked William Clark for his freedom as payment for his service. Clark refused. York remained enslaved for years, and Clark eventually sold him or gave him away out of spite. Some accounts say York was freed in the 1810s and moved to Tennessee, where he worked as a freight hauler. Other accounts say he died trying to return to St. Louis to reunite with his wife, who was enslaved by a different owner. York's role in one of America's most famous expeditions was deliberately minimized for over a century. Early histories barely mentioned him. He was written out of textbooks and monuments. Only in recent decades have historians demanded that his contributions be recognized. Number 10. Isom Dart, the cowboy outlaw who went straight and was murdered for it. Isom Dart was born enslaved in Arkansas in 1849 with the name End Huddleston. After emancipation, he headed west and worked as a cowboy, rodeo performer, and eventually a cattle rustler in Wyoming and Colorado. For years, he ran with outlaw gangs, stealing cattle and horses from big ranchers. But in the 1880s, Dart decided to go legitimate. He bought his own ranch in Browns Park, Colorado, and started raising horses and cattle honestly. He became known as one of the best horse breakers in the region, with a reputation for being kind to animals and fair in business. Local ranchers respected him, and he built a quiet, peaceful life. But the big cattle companies didn't forgive his outlaw past. In 1900, they hired Tom Horn, a notorious assassin who worked for wealthy ranchers, to eliminate small operators they saw as threats. On October 3, 1900, Horn ambushed Isom Dart and shot him dead from hiding. Dart never had a chance to defend himself. He was murdered in cold blood because corporations wanted his land and didn't like that a former outlaw, especially a black one, was succeeding independently. Isom Dart's story is a tragedy. He tried to leave his criminal past behind and live honestly, but the system wouldn't let him. He was killed not for crimes he committed, but for refusing to stay in the place society had assigned him. Number 11. Clara Brown, the angel of the Rockies who saved dozens of lives. Clara Brown was born enslaved in Virginia around 1800. She was sold away from her family multiple times, losing her husband and children to the brutality of slavery. After emancipation, she worked and saved money, determined to find her lost family. In 1859, at nearly 60 years old, Clara traveled to Colorado during the Pikes Peak gold rush. She worked as a laundress in mining camps, cooking, cleaning, and caring for miners. She saved every penny and invested in real estate as Colorado towns boomed. Within a few years, she was worth over $10,000, a fortune at the time. But Clara didn't keep her wealth. She used it to help others. She paid for the passage of formerly enslaved people to come west and start new lives. She nursed sick miners back to health, often for free. She donated money to build churches and schools. During harsh winters, she opened her home to anyone who needed shelter, regardless of race. She spent years searching for her daughter, Eliza Jane, who had been sold away decades earlier. In 1882, after over 40 years of searching, Clara found her. They reunited in Colorado, and Clara spent her final years with the family she thought she'd lost forever. When Clara died in 1885, the Colorado Pioneer Society made her an honorary member, one of the few women and the only black woman to receive that honor. Clara Brown represents thousands of black pioneers who built the West through generosity, resilience, and faith. Her story is one of triumph over unimaginable tragedy. Number 12, Willie Kennard, the black cowboy who became a Nebraska state legislator. Willie Kennard was born free in Ohio in 1867, unusual for a black person at that time. He moved to Nebraska as a young man and worked as a cowboy and rancher, building a reputation as a skilled horseman and honest businessman. In the 1890s, he did something extraordinary. He ran for political office. In 1892, Kennard was elected to the Nebraska state legislature, becoming one of the first black state legislators west of the Mississippi. He served 2 terms, fighting for land rights, education, and fair treatment for black settlers and workers. He introduced bills to protect homesteaders from fraud and to fund schools in rural areas. His political career was remarkable because it happened during an era of extreme racism. The 1890s saw the rise of Jim Crow laws, lynching, and widespread disenfranchisement of black voters. Yet Kennard managed to win elections in a predominantly white state and serve effectively. He did it through competence, integrity, and earning the respect of his constituents. After his political career, Kennard returned to ranching and remained a respected community leader in Nebraska until his death in 1938. His legacy proves that black pioneers weren't just laborers and outlaws. They were also leaders, lawmakers, and builders of frontier society. Number 13, Ben Hodges, the con artist who became a legend in Dodge City. Ben Hodges was born around 1856, possibly in Kentucky, and arrived in Dodge City, Kansas in the 1870s. He wasn't a gunfighter or a lawman. He was a con artist, and he was brilliant at it. Hodges made a living through scams, gambling, and clever manipulation, becoming one of Dodge City's most infamous characters. His most famous con involved claiming to be related to wealthy ranchers or businessmen. He'd walk into a saloon, announce that he was the nephew or cousin of a well-known figure, and use that fake connection to borrow money, run up tabs, or gain trust. By the time people figured out he was lying, Hodges would be long gone or would have moved on to a new scam. He also ran card games and dice games rigged in his favor. He'd lose a few hands to build confidence, then clean out his opponents when they got comfortable. He was arrested dozens of times for theft, fraud, and vagrancy, but he always talked his way out or served short sentences and went right back to his schemes. What made Hodges unique was that he survived in a dangerous town during a violent era through intelligence and charm rather than violence. He never killed anyone. He never robbed anyone at gunpoint. He just outsmarted people, and in a weird way, Dodge City residents respected him for it. They'd complain about being conned, then laugh about it later and buy him a drink. Ben Hodges died in 1929, and his obituary in the Dodge City newspaper was surprisingly affectionate, calling him a legend and a character who added color to the town's history. He represents the fact that not every black pioneer fit into simple categories. Some, like Hodges, carved out survival through wit in a system designed to destroy them. Number 14, Edward Rose, the mountain man who became a Crow War chief. Edward Rose was born around 1790 to a white father and a black Cherokee mother. He became one of the most famous mountain men of the early 19th century, working as a trapper, guide, and interpreter. But what made him legendary was that he was adopted by the Crow Nation and became one of their war chiefs. Rose lived with the Crow for years, learning their language, customs, and fighting techniques. He married into the tribe and proved himself in battle repeatedly. The Crow respected him so much they made him a chief, a position of honor rarely given to outsiders. He fought alongside Crow warriors against rival tribes and white encroachers, defending Crow territory with the same ferocity as any born member of the nation. In 1823, Rose was hired as a guide for the Ashley Expedition, a fur trading venture up the Missouri River. When the expedition was attacked by Arikara warriors, Rose's knowledge and combat skills saved lives. He later worked as a guide for other expeditions, including one led by Jim Bridger, another famous mountain man who credited Rose with teaching him survival skills. Rose was killed in 1833 or 1834, possibly in a battle with Arikara warriors or in a dispute with other trappers. The exact details of his death are unclear, but his legacy is undeniable. He was one of the toughest, most skilled frontiersmen of his era. And his story destroys the myth that black men weren't central figures in early Western exploration. Number 15. Mary Ellen Pleasant, the mother of civil rights in California. Mary Ellen Pleasant was born around 1814, possibly in Georgia or Virginia. She escaped or was freed from slavery and made her way to California during the Gold Rush. She arrived in San Francisco in 1852 and quickly became one of the most powerful and mysterious figures in the city's history. Pleasant worked as a housekeeper and cook for wealthy families, but she was also a brilliant entrepreneur and investor. She used inside information from her employers to invest in real estate, stocks, and businesses. By the 1860s, she was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, making her one of the wealthiest women in California. But Pleasant didn't just accumulate wealth. She used it to fight for civil rights. She funded abolitionist efforts before the Civil War, reportedly giving money to John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. She smuggled formerly enslaved people to freedom via the Underground Railroad. After the war, she fought segregation in California, personally challenging discriminatory laws. In 1866, Pleasant sued a San Francisco streetcar company for refusing to let her ride because she was black. She won the case, setting a legal precedent that helped dismantle segregation on public transportation in California. She also fought housing discrimination and used her wealth to support black businesses and families. Pleasant's personal life was controversial. Rumors swirled that she manipulated wealthy men, practiced voodoo, and was involved in scandals. Much of this was racist propaganda designed to discredit a powerful black woman who refused to stay in her place. She died in 1904, and for decades, her contributions were minimized or erased. Only recently have historians recognized her as a pioneering civil rights activist and business leader. Number 16. Jim Beckwourth, the mountain man who discovered a Sierra Nevada pass. James Pearson Beckwourth was born enslaved in Virginia in 1798. His mother was enslaved, but his father was Sir Jennings Beckwith, a white plantation owner who acknowledged James as his son, an unusual situation at the time. Beckwith freed James as a young man and apprenticed him to a blacksmith in St. Louis, but Beckwourth didn't want to spend his life at a forge. He wanted adventure, freedom, and a life where his skills mattered more than his skin color. In 1824, at age 26, he joined a fur-trapping expedition led by William Henry Ashley and headed into the Rocky Mountains, beginning one of the most legendary careers in frontier history. Beckwourth became one of the greatest mountain men of the 19th century. He trapped beaver across the Rockies, living off the land for months at a time in conditions that killed weaker men. He survived grizzly bear attacks, starvation, extreme cold, and hostile encounters with rival trappers and warriors. His skills as a hunter, fighter, and negotiator were so exceptional that he was adopted by the Crow Nation, one of the most powerful tribes on the northern plains. Like Edward Rose before him, Beckwourth lived with the Crow for years. He became a war chief, married several Crow women according to tribal custom, and fought in battles defending Crow territory against rival tribes like the Blackfeet and Lakota. He spoke multiple indigenous languages fluently and could move through territories that were deadly for most white trappers. The Crow called him Morning Star and treated him as one of their own. His time with the Crow wasn't a temporary adventure. It was a full integration into their society. In 1850, Beckwourth discovered a mountain pass through the Sierra Nevada that became a crucial route for settlers heading to California. The pass, still called Beckwourth Pass today, allowed thousands of migrants to avoid more dangerous routes. He personally guided wagon trains through the mountains, saving lives and helping settle Northern California. Beckwourth dictated his autobiography in 1856, titled The Life and Adventures of James P. Beckwourth. In it, he described battles with grizzly bears, escapes from hostile tribes, and adventures that some historians doubted. But other mountain men who knew him confirmed most of his stories were true or only slightly exaggerated. Beckwourth died in 1866 or 1867, possibly while visiting the Crow Nation. His legacy as an explorer and frontiersman is undeniable, but for decades, his race was downplayed or erased from history books. Number 17. Daniel Webster Wallace, known as 80 John, the cowboy who fought racism his entire life. Daniel Wallace was born enslaved in South Carolina in 1860. After emancipation, his family moved to Texas, where he became a cowboy. He earned the nickname 80 John after excelling in a bronc riding competition when he was 80 years old. Yes, 80 years old, still riding and breaking horses better than men half his age. Wallace worked on ranches across Texas for over 6 decades. He was known as one of the best horse breakers in the state, with a reputation for patience and skill. White ranchers hired him despite their racism because he was simply better than everyone else. But Wallace never accepted second-class treatment. He demanded fair pay, refused to be disrespected, and walked away from jobs when employers tried to cheat him. In his later years, Wallace spoke openly about racism in the ranching industry. He told interviewers that black cowboys did the same dangerous work as white cowboys but were paid less, given worse equipment, and denied credit for their contributions. He said that black cowboys built the West as much as anyone, but history was being rewritten to erase them. Wallace died in 1939, just shy of 80 years old, still working and still fighting. His interviews, recorded in the 1930s, are some of the few first-hand accounts we have from black cowboys about what their lives were actually like. He made sure his story, and the story of thousands like him, survived. Number 18. Elvira Conley, the pioneering black homesteader in Montana. Elvira Conley was born free in Ohio in 1851, rare for a black woman at that time. She moved west in the 1880s, determined to claim her own land and build her own life. In 1889, she filed a homestead claim in Montana, staking 160 acres near the town of Cascade. She was one of the few black women in the region, and one of the few women of any race homesteading alone. Conley built her homestead from scratch. She cleared land, built a cabin, raised livestock, and grew crops. She faced brutal winters, isolation, and constant threats from wild animals and harsh weather. She also faced racism from neighboring white settlers who didn't want a black woman claiming land near them. She persisted anyway. Conley successfully proved up her claim after 5 years of continuous residence, receiving full ownership of her land in 1894. She became a landowner, a rare achievement for any woman in that era and almost unheard of for a black woman. She continued working her homestead for decades, eventually selling it and moving to Seattle, where she died in 1935. Elvira Conley's story represents thousands of black homesteaders who built lives on the frontier despite facing discrimination, violence, and systemic barriers. The Homestead Act was supposed to offer opportunity, but for black settlers, it required extraordinary courage just to survive. Number 19. Grant Johnson, the black marshal who cleaned up the toughest territory. Grant Johnson was born in Arkansas in 1865, just after the Civil War ended. He grew up in Indian Territory and became a deputy U.S. Marshal in the 1890s, working in one of the most lawless regions in America. Johnson was one of Bass Reeves' contemporaries and shared his reputation for courage and fairness. Johnson arrested hundreds of outlaws during his 20-year career. He tracked down murderers, bank robbers, cattle rustlers, and fugitives across thousands of square miles of rough terrain. He survived multiple shootouts and was wounded several times but refused to quit. Like Reeves, Johnson treated everyone equally under the law, earning respect from both white and black communities. One of his most famous cases involved tracking a gang of horse thieves across 3 states. Johnson followed them for weeks, living off the land, enduring harsh weather, and never giving up. When he finally caught them, he arrested the entire gang single-handedly, bringing them back for trial without firing a shot. It was the kind of patient, skilled law enforcement that defined the best marshals of the era. Johnson retired in 1912 and died in 1920. Like most black lawmen, his achievements were ignored by historians for decades. His name doesn't appear in most books about frontier law enforcement. He was written out of history because acknowledging black lawmen complicated the narrative of the Wild West as a white man's domain. Here's what nobody wants to admit. The frontier wouldn't have been settled without black cowboys, black lawmen, black soldiers, and black pioneers. 1 in 4 cowboys were black. The Buffalo Soldiers opened and protected trails for white settlers. Black entrepreneurs built businesses and communities that still exist today. But Hollywood and history books spent over a century erasing them. Why? Because acknowledging black contributions to westward expansion complicates the mythology. If you admit that black people were essential to building the West, you have to confront the racism they faced while doing it. You have to admit that the heroic frontier was also a place of brutal discrimination, segregation, and violence against the very people who made it possible. Bass Reeves should be as famous as Wyatt Earp. Bill Pickett should be in every rodeo history book. Mary Ellen Pleasant should be recognized as a civil rights pioneer. Cathay Williams should be honored for her military service. York should have monuments. But instead, Hollywood made thousands of westerns starring white actors and pretended black people didn't exist. This erasure was deliberate. In the early 20th century, as Jim Crow laws spread and racism intensified, popular culture worked to remove black people from the story of the American West. The few black characters who appeared in westerns were servants, criminals, or comic relief. Black cowboys, lawmen, and pioneers were written out entirely. Textbooks followed Hollywood's lead. Generations grew up believing the West was built by white men alone. But the truth survives. Every name you heard today was real, every achievement documented, every story verified. These 19 heroes and thousands like them built the West, enforced the law, invented new skills, and changed history. They did it while facing racism that would have broken weaker people. They did it knowing their contributions might be erased. They did it anyway. So the next time you watch a Western, ask yourself who's missing from the screen. Ask why Hollywood lied for so long. Ask why schools don't teach these stories. And then do something about it. Share these names. Tell these stories. Make sure the next generation knows the real history. Drop a comment telling me which hero inspired you most. Hit like if you want more hidden history that Hollywood buried. Subscribe because next week we're exposing more truths they don't want you to know. And remember, they can rewrite the movies, but they can't erase the truth. Not anymore.